I think we have to look at ourselves clearly, and that is why I'm a dualist, because I'm not an optimist, I'm not a pessimist. I see humans as exactly what we are, the constant potential for excellence and the constant potential for destruction.
Welcome to Back to the Future podcast. My name is Victor Sadia, and I talk with brilliant minds and hearts of people who want to uproot and transform the current health and wellness paradigm. Rahaf Harfoush is a digital anthropologist, professor, and New York Times bestselling author. She coaches people on how to become humane productivity practitioners and how to live creatively without sacrificing their mental, emotional, or physical well-being. She is part of France's National Digital Council and a policy fellow at the Oxford Internet Institute. She teaches innovation and disruptive business models at SciencesPo in Paris. On this episode, Rahaf tells us about her new conundrum. How can we strive less to achieve and yet achieve all the same? She also shares the process of losing her mother in a very short period of time and the journey she undertook to uncover the many griefs and emotions she had already stored in her body even without knowing. We talked about the future of heart-centric leadership and how leaders are, in essence, healers. Our opinions on the fast-paced changes of our technological ecosystem must remember at all times that human beings are fundamentally gray, and so, being an optimist or a pessimist might be a very futile position to hold. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Today we have Rahaf Harfoush. Rahaf, thank you so much for being here.
Hi.
I have so many topics to discuss with you, but before we go into that, tell me, what would you like to discuss? What's on your mind lately? It can be anything.
Oh, so many things on my mind. I think I was saying to you before, I read this essay called The Way of the Mediocre Man that really challenges our notion of how much effort we put into something as a measure of our self-worth. And I have just been mulling it over nonstop for the last several weeks, and I can feel it coming up against my own held beliefs about work. So I would love to get into that because it's such an interesting topic. I think it intersects with a lot of the things we want to talk about today.
What would you say was the thing or the paragraph or the line or the idea that has really impacted or challenged you profoundly?
In the essay, he was talking about how he wrote a book. So obviously I relate, and how he didn't do a book launch. He just released it, and then he sold like 30 copies, and he was like, this is a great success, and he just kept moving on. And it was this idea that you didn't have to try to go 100% on everything 100% of the time, that you could still achieve success and happiness and fulfillment without needing to be so obsessed with effort. And I should mention that I'm reading this as I'm trying to wrap my head around the Tao Ching by Lao Tzu, which is all about the art of wu wei and the art of not doing. And so I'm really trying to look inside myself and find the programming where I am associating doing and striving, ambition, optimization, improvement, always striving as the only way I've ever known. And I'm being very challenged on a spiritual level to consider, what is the act of non-striving, and what if non-striving can get me there equally? And that's what I'm kind of mulling right now in my brain.
Yeah, and I think that writing a book is one of those activities where you have all those forces working at the same time. I recently, last week, I was in a 4-day writing retreat. I'm also writing a book, and it was my first time I went to the woods by myself. No human contact whatsoever, and I told to myself, listen, forget about the product, just focus on the process, and I would say not only enjoy it, but release all the expectations you have. That's the gift that the book will bring to you. How can you relate in this sense that you've written 5 books you've run through many processes on writing books, and at the same time, you can't get your head around of controlling the process.
I mean, I think it's, I don't know. I think it's really interesting. I think it's about shifting your idea to expand the book, that the book isn't just one thing. I think when you talk about to people writing a book, they're like, I'm going to write the book. And then as though the process is finished. And what really struck me with the essay was that he was saying that for him, the book was a part of an ongoing conversation. It was a part of an ecosystem of ideas. So he didn't have to worry about this book being the end all be all of his work, because it was going to just be a path on the road, a step on the road. And for him, he was gaining a lot of joy from just being on that path. So it's very much about, I think, what philosophers over many generations have said, that we are not actually owed the fruits of our labor. We are just owed the labor. All we can really invest in is the process. And in one of her TED Talks, Elizabeth Gilbert had a really fascinating perspective on the similarities between massive success and massive failures. And she said, and I'll never forget this was also one of those things that really like opened my brain, was she said that your brain can't tell the difference between a massive success and a massive failure. It can only measure the distance that you've moved from where you're used to. So the only thing you can really do if you get thrown in either direction is to get back to center as fast as possible. And that means just get back to writing, come back home, come back to the work, come back to the process, and don't worry about whether or not it's going to be really successful or really or a big flop. And she's had both. And so that sort of piqued my curiosity, and I started following other people and reading about other people who are quite prolific. And I landed on Isaac Asimov, the science fiction author. And he says that he doesn't even, once he releases a book, he like doesn't think about it again, and he just goes on to the next. And somebody came up to him one time and he said to him something like, I thought your last book really sucked. And he goes, my last book, I don't even remember what that is. I've already written 2 more, So there's something in there about, I think, like removing expectations, releasing control, but there's also something very wu-wei, art of not doing, art of not control, where it's like the Buddhists call it, what's it? Chopping wood, carry water, right? Where you don't need to worry about the outcome, but that is very much in opposition to everything we have been taught in our culture about what you need to do to succeed. So it's a very deep deprogramming, and I'm struggling with it. I haven't quite wrapped my head around it.
Yeah, and I think that's the line, wrapping our head around those ideas, because I think that our head is already pre-programmed to not really wrap our head around those foreign paradoxical ideas. And I think what I've been trying to do is to bring it to the body. Like, once you understand this idea and it makes sense, and you want to go through these philosophies of releasing the outcome and just focusing on process, how does it feel on your body? What things is your body feeling in a very automatic way? And just observing that and just saying, oh, now I feel anxious. Now I'm dreaming about, my next bestseller, and I think I'll be happy. But how does my body feel in this moment? So, like, actually, my book is about, in a sense, the similarities between the creative process and healing, for example, from cancer. Like, you have to, at the same time, release the expectation that you are going to survive, and just focus on the things that you are in the present tense feeling, doing, and healing. And how you can heal, but you can still die, in a sense. And you can extend your life, but don't really heal, in all the aspects of healing, not only the physical. So we can go into that topic, because you had a very difficult 2-3 past years. I would love to understand what happened, and how your own process with healing began, and work through it. And probably we can even intertwine these experiences through the paradox that we're experiencing now.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very long story, but to put it simply, I lost my mother very unexpectedly in late 2020. It was very much unanticipated, unexpected. She was in really great health. It wasn't COVID related. It was something else. It was a brain tumor, and it happened at such a speed. The time between her diagnosis and her passing was like 10 days. It was very quick. You like my reality was barely readjusting to this blow, and it was already again another change. And then I had a series of very sort of unfortunate events, very stressful getting home, the way I found out about her passing. There was just like a lot of things that in hindsight, I now know, thanks to the guidance of medical professionals, was like deeply traumatic and put my body into an intense state of shock and into a state of I had PTSD after the fact, which, as many people know, or many people not know, is when your body is just stuck in this fight or flight response and like cannot distinguish that the threat is over. So your body is literally held in a state of danger for months and months and months. And I experienced what is called a somatic and complex grief, which meant my grief, I was so numb emotionally. I didn't feel anything emotionally for a long time. And I don't have a lot of memories of that period of time, believe it or not. There's very little that I remember about that time. But what ended up happening, and again, I'm telling you all this having gone through it, but what ended up happening was all of my suppressed grief started manifesting in a variety of physical symptoms. Migraines, back pain, joint aching. And the worst symptom was I had nonstop nausea for like 8 months. Every single day, I just literally felt like I was constantly on the verge of throwing up, which is awful. And so I couldn't eat, I couldn't work out, everything hurt. And because what had happened to my mom was so unexpected and she was in such good health, I also developed, in addition to all of this, severe health anxiety, where I was convinced that every single symptom that I developed, I was sure it was going to be something horrible and I was going to die. So not only was I dealing with the stress of the death and the grief, I was dealing with this nonstop anxiety that was also putting my system into this like insane fight or flight or freeze process. And I ended up, luckily, I live in a country, I live in France, where I'm so beyond grateful we have a healthcare system that is free and affordable. I ended up maybe getting like thousands, that's an exaggeration, but a lot of tests, everything that you could think of, like my blood drawn multiple times, ultrasounds, an MRI, x-rays. Like I would go to my doctor and I would be like, my hip's hurting, I have bone cancer, I have a stomach ache, I have ovarian cancer, and then it was kidney cancer, then it was liver cancer, then it was, I have migraine, so I for sure have a brain tumor. And every time I genuinely in my heart, like believed it, which as you can imagine is not a great state of mind to keep for months and months on end. And every time the test would come back, like I was fine. And I remember thinking, I just wish they would find something because at least then I would know. And it took me a very long time to understand that it was somatic, that it was psychological, and it was grief. And once I realized there was nothing wrong, my doctor said to me, you need to go start doing somatic body therapy. So I started doing EMDR, eye movement resensitization, EMD, eye movement desensitization.
Rapid, yeah.
Thank you. You'll know. I mean, so, sorry for the people listening, but like we'll figure it out. But basically, that is a type of therapy that talks to your body and just gets you to remove stress from your body. And what really surprised me about that experience was not only how well that worked, but how the grief was a gateway to all sorts of other pain that was stored in my body from a variety of ages that I never even remembered. And so I went on this journey and I started really doing, I started doing EMDR regularly. I started doing, which we should talk about, internal family systems, which is such a good modality. And eventually I started exploring psychotherapy, psilocybin-assisted psychotherapy, so psychedelic treatments in Amsterdam under the guidance of a psychiatrist and a psychologist. And that was really, it was like these three things that I did, sort of the talk therapy for my mind to understand it, the EMDR for my body to speak to my body, and then the psilocybin was speaking to my soul. And the psilocybin ended up being probably one of the most healing, transformative, magical, beautiful experiences of my life, where I was able to tap into my body and release a grief that had been trapped because there were no words to describe it. So it was literally trapped in my body. And I had this beautiful trip where I felt my mother's energy very closely. I essentially think about it as it was the opportunity to say goodbye that I always wish I had had with her. And woke up, came down from that trip. It was so beautiful, was crying in the best possible way, felt cleansed. And then woke up the next morning, and for the first time in about 8 months was not nauseous. And the nausea did come back like once or twice a little bit, but that was the turning point. And then I started healing and getting better and better and better. So the mind-body connection is something that I am so deeply passionate about, and I want other people to know about it because I didn't know so much about this. And if I had known, I would have been able to ease my healing. It would have been so much easier if I had just understood a little bit better the mind-body link. So I hope anybody listening to this can just get some inspiration that could help them in their own healing journey.
Yeah, in a sense, I can relate that, I'm not sure about this, but I assume that before this experience, you were, you're a highly intellectual, mental, rational being who just researches the shit out of everything and just figures it out. And I've been the same. And certain experiences that bring you back to the body and know that that there are things in the body that we cannot tap with just our own linear understanding of how the machine works. When you are humble enough, because it's a matter of humility, and also courageous enough or desperate enough to just try everything, and that doesn't work, then I'll go to the somatic thing or whatever. And you allow that the experience to happen, then you start living as more embodied. So does that experience change the way you live, you interact, you work, you even write books, knowing that there's a body there registering or even just somatizing all the things that have been passing even before you were born, and all the trauma that your mind can't really recall?
I mean, this is something I want to write about and speak about for sure. I think the biggest thing is my therapist would always say to me, you cannot think your way out of a feeling problem. And again, going back to skill sets, many of us were never taught how to hold uncomfortable emotions in our body. And we see this now, on TikTok now. I don't have kids, but the algorithm shows me sometimes these parenting videos because I think there's a lot of similarities and there's a point to this. But there's this new style of parenting called gentle parenting or embodied parenting, which is basically when this little person, this little kid who cannot regulate their emotions, when they have a temper tantrum, that the way that you respond to the temper tantrum is to just be with them in that difficult moment and just be a supportive presence so that they can learn how to regulate their own emotions. And when you think about traditionally, I don't know about you, but how parents that I have known and my own parents dealt with tantrums as toddlers is, stop right now, this isn't right, you're bad, all of these things. And so what I realized is that every single person, I believe, tell me if I'm wrong if you're listening, but every single person, I think at some point has abandoned a part of themselves, like we all do, which is the price of growing up. We get hurt, we get told we're too much, we get convinced that a part of us is only worth loving if we act a certain way, if we perform in a certain way, if we achieve enough, if we are successful enough. And nobody ever tells us that it is our job to go back and find that little piece of ourselves and reintegrate it. So what I have learned is that when I'm dealing with things in my body, it's not actually just my body. What I'm dealing with is the younger version of myself who was never taught how to self-regulate. And so in a way, I am reparenting myself, where when I am feeling a difficult emotion, when you said earlier, you ask yourself, where am I feeling this in my body? I would add another question, which I always ask myself, how old does this feeling feel? How old is the me that is feeling this? Because you will be so surprised. Sometimes I will feel something and I'll sit with it and I'll be like, oh, this is like a me at 15 years old, or this is me at 6, or this is me at 12. And you realize that there are parts of you that are so young and vulnerable, and there are parts of you that don't know that you're an adult now. So they're still feeling the way that they did when they were a kid. And so you as the adult, me as the adult, I've learned to be so much more compassionate to myself, where if I'm feeling a difficult emotion, even just the act of putting your hand on your heart, which simulates the feeling of being hugged, and just saying, it's okay, I've got you, we've got this, I'm here, it's okay. It sounds so silly sometimes, but it's so powerful. And that's what ends up healing, because the inner child isn't afraid of the emotions. The inner child is afraid that no one is going to be there with them as they experience the emotions. So as I go through life, I have been trying to be very compassionate to myself. And by extension, I started to see everybody through the lens of this inner child. So when I see somebody acting out or acting mean or acting angry, it's like I can almost see all the layers peeling away. And I say, this is an inner child that needs affection, attention, validation. This is somebody who's hurt. This is somebody who, because if you go back again to books, if you go back to the sacred agreements, the 4 sacred agreements, when he says that, the way that you talk to others is a direct reflection of the way you talk to yourself. And so I've heard from my own friends over this past transformation that I have just become a lot gentler, just because I'm trying to be gentler with myself. So I'm really trying to meet people if they're having a difficult emotion. And because I am no longer afraid of difficult emotions in my body, I am no longer uncomfortable if you as my friend are having a difficult emotion, which means I can create space for you to have that difficult emotion. And I didn't know how to do that before.
That's why the intellectual, rational part of you is so useful here, because you're so eloquent, and it's easier to understand this way, because much of this theory sometimes comes from other ways of communicating rather than just linear language, as you just described it. And for many people, it's easier to understand it that way, because you're also being vulnerable at the same time and saying, I'm still a child. And that's something that we don't say enough. And I think that's also the basis of planetary healing. I'm working on how to social, environmental, and all these systemic thinking ways of approaching the life that we've built for ourselves. But it's still, when you say systemic thinking, it feels like you have to go to the UN, or you have to go to a big corporation, or start a big NGO. But I think it's more about just talking to others the way you want to keep talking to yourself in this sense, and reparenting the world we want to see through this act of continued healing, because healing in that sense is an act of creation. Just healing will create a new paradigm. It's not that we have to change. Well, we will change institutions and many things, but at the same time, or even before that, it's just healing at this primordial level.
Yeah, well, I mean, if everything is a reflection of our inner world, how can we love the world if we don't love ourselves? How can we create conditions for prosperity and for regeneration and for restoration when we treat ourselves so horribly? I look at the burnout crisis and the environmental crisis as being mirrors of each other, because how can we protect the planet and save its resources when we treat our own resources with such disrespect? We deplete our creativity, our bodies, our mental energy. We're so hard on ourselves. We pollute our minds. And then I look and I say, well, of course we treat the world this way because we don't treat our bodies in the way that we should be. And I remember reading, and I'm going to quote a lot of books. I'll give you a book list, but there's a really interesting book by a guy named Nicholas Gianni, and it's called Leader as Healer, which was a really incredible read. Now, I remember him saying that if you have a healed leader, a conscious leader, a heart-centric leader, just could not treat people this way, could not treat organizations this way, could not treat the environment this way. Because as I am healing, the natural extension of my own healing is grace for myself and grace to others, right? Or the idea of the Buddhist prayer, may you be healthy, may you be safe, may you be loved. And it's like you want to extend that outwards. And then you look and you're just like, are we really fighting over minimum wage? Are we really arguing about whether or not to pollute the oceans? Are we really talking about whether or not we should deforest the Amazon? Are we really not paying attention to the bees and the birds and the planet and the trees and the bugs and the animals? Like, how can we not when you see all the love that's out there? So I really have started believing that we have to start by healing each other. And the fascinating thing is, as humans are incredibly interconnected on so many different levels. And one of the interesting skills I've picked up from all of this is learning about co-regulation and how my nervous system can calm your nervous system. So in fact, when you heal yourself and when you're able to be calm and when you're able to extend that grace and that affection and that trust to another person, just by my body and my voice, I can calm you. And so imagine if we were all just sort of throwing this blanket of calm around each other and saying just a little bit more patience, just a little bit more kindness, just a little bit more understanding, just a little bit more, healing, little bit by little bit. But remember, we're doing all of this against a technological backdrop where there are algorithms that are deliberately invested in activating adrenaline and cortisol in our bodies. And so that's also a really big sort of clash.
It is a huge clash, and in a sense, this communication that it's enabled through technology can allow us to be more human in a sense, because we are now in contact and we can co-regulate us. But this at the same time entails a whole lot of vulnerability and a whole lot of courage to show that behind the screen you are still a hurting child, basically.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And the algorithm, I guess, can also give you a lot of views if you go that way. It's not that if you only, show an image of yourself that you are not yourself, the algorithm will follow that. But it will also follow this way of understanding who we are, because we connect to that into a very deep level. And you're a technology dualist. Everything is awesome and terrible at the same time. But let's go into that, because we still believe that technology is out there and we are out here, but we are cyborgs. We've been cyborgs for decades now, or even more. And how can we integrate this word technology, knowing that we are the technology? The technology is not out there either being the good guy or the bad guy. And I think that reappropriation of who we are as technology is basically this reappropriation of I am all these things that are happening at the same time, and I have to reunify with what I have been unified all along. If that makes sense.
Yeah. I think we have to look at ourselves clearly, and that is why I'm a dualist, because I'm not an optimist. I'm not a pessimist. I see humans as exactly what we are, the constant potential for excellence and the constant potential for destruction, creation, destruction, greed, ego, love, hate. Like, we are all of those things. And yet I see people who are building these technological infrastructures who keep pretending that they're building it for this idealized version of ourselves. It's like every time somebody is shocked when a technology gets misappropriated, it's like, why are you shocked? Human beings are fundamentally gray. And we make choices every day, and some choices are good choices and some choices are bad choices. Every person has the capacity to act in kindness and to act out of hate and to be cruel. Like, we all have that in us. And so what people don't understand is that our technology has to reflect our flaws and has to reflect the darkness in us, because that darkness is just a part of who we are. And I think it would make a lot more sense, and we would be much better positioned to manage it if we walked in with our eyes wide open, instead of just saying, well, let's just hope for the best. Let's just hope the best people use this technology in the best way, instead of saying, no, we are, two things can be true. Going back to therapy, two things can be true, so you can have good people and bad people at the same time. You can have a good person do a bad thing, a bad person do a good thing. And I find that people have a hard time holding this complexity because we want simple answers. We want to know, is meta good? Is meta bad? Is AI good? Is AI bad? And it's like, it's both and it's everything. And we need to rise up to the occasion and actually start dealing with this complexity and saying, okay, well, how are we going to try to protect ourselves? How are we going to minimize this damage? How are we going to anticipate unintended harm? We don't know what the harm is going to be, but we know there's going to be harm, and we know we're not going to have meant it. So what can we do to create safety protocols so that when the unanticipated harm happens, we're not like, oh, wow, oops. We've polarized entire communities. We've devastated young people's mental health. We've undermined democracy. We've enabled the spread of conspiracy theories. It's like, none of this should have been a surprise to you if you've ever met a human being in your life. Like, this is who we are, the good and the bad and the ugly all mixed together. And our technology is a reflection of that.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. Two ideas there. The complexity that we cannot hold in the same space. And going back to the body, some people call this intuition. Like, intuition, I think for intuition, this part of you that you can't really explain how it works. I think it's more prone to understand this complexity and contradictory things that are happening between us at the same time. And we usually don't really tap into that because we are just so focused on the mind. And at the same time, because that's something that we can't really put into words, because our own language is still dualistic and black and white. I think that's part of the next paradigm in the sense of understanding that we are contradictory, but not feeling the despair that our own system has created when we feel contradictory. And I think that technology in this sense can also, I don't know how exactly, but show us that we are networks, and you can mimic this on the blockchain. We can mimic this on networks, on large language models, on whatever is being constructed now. That there's no duality. There's just forces, connections, nodes, and I'm always trying to push forward this linear way of thinking into that convoluted way of thinking. Which at the same time is a way of communicating, a way of feeling, a way of understanding who we are, a way of we tell stories. And yes, the problem is that sometimes what sells is just the simple things. So we have to bring all these economic forces that just go to our pain points and say, I'll give you the solution, just pay $9.99. How can we bring this discussion about the importance of money and speed, and the cult of speed that we have, and productivity, into this contradictory way of existing, and how you can bring it back to this article that you mentioned at the beginning, where you just have to believe it, and probably just it will be that way. It's not that the answer is out there. It's probably just embodying that contradiction and seeing that it's not so bad after all.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. There's kind of two things that I think in response to what you said. The first is going back to understanding our own emotions. Like, I see emotions as, gateways into what people are really thinking, what people are feeling, even if they won't say it. And anger, more often than not, is a shield for pain and a shield for hurt. And one of the things I have noticed is that if you actually listen, and I spent a lot of time in conspiracy theory communities, in misinformation, disinformation communities, and the one thing I walked away from, I walked away with, is the fundamental understanding that what everybody wants is the same. People want to feel safe, they want to be loved, they want their kids to have opportunities, they want to live a good life, regardless of what their beliefs are. This is what they sort of feel. And so when you start looking and you start peeling apart the narratives of what they're saying, whether it's QAnon, whether it's government conspiracy theories, whatever it is, you start to see that these are people, many of them, who feel lost and disconnected and economically left behind. There's a lot of changes that are happening. It's very overwhelming. And so I think people get so caught up in the detail that they ignore what the stories are telling us. And the funny thing about conspiracy theories is that conspiracy theories always spike in periods of societal unrest where there's really big gaps or growing gaps of social injustice and income inequality. There are conspiracy theories that were circulating during the times of the Industrial Revolution that if I just showed them to you, you would have thought they were the conspiracy theories of today. And it's because people are trying to make sense of a very complex world where the reality is there's no clear good guys and there's no clear bad guys. And because it's so ambiguous, it's easier to just say, okay, well, I'm going to tell myself a simple story using all the symbols that I have grown up with. Because if you look at conspiracy theories, what do they all have? A good guy, a bad guy, a hero, a villain, a fight, very clear lines between good and evil. Like, how nice it would be if the world was like that, but it's not. And so I just, from an empathetic perspective, want people to understand that we're fundamentally going through all these technological changes, and it's very scary and destabilizing for a lot of people. Now, in terms of like how you kind of like the second part of your question, which is like how you deal with the speed of it all, it kind of goes back to the ideology of what we talked about at the beginning, because I find myself thinking specifically in relation to like billionaires recently, which is how much is enough? So yes, we're striving, and I'm striving towards a goal, but what is that goal exactly? Like, how much money is enough money? Because I personally don't believe that it is ethical for billionaires to exist. I don't think there is a single reason for one human being to have $1 billion, let alone to have multiple hundreds of billions of dollars. It is just, with the level of poverty we have in the world today, this type of capital inequality is just absurd to me. And I often find myself genuinely asking, without judgment, how much is enough? So you need a $550 million yacht. You need 27 houses you don't live in. Like, at some point, it's like we've lost the plot of what the point is and how we're trying to live our lives, which I think is just like something. So I'm always asking myself, how much is enough? How much do I need to have that I feel safe, but like within, sort of reason? And that, I think, is the bigger question, because it's like we are being sort of brainwashed or conditioned in a way to idolize billionaires, where people are idolizing these people as heroes, and they think they're closer to being a billionaire. Maybe one day I'll be a billionaire, not realizing that most of us are closer to homelessness than we are to being a billionaire. And I was recently watching the new movie about Michael Jordan, the Michael Jordan deal. I don't know if you saw it. I'm not going to give it. Well,
Yeah.
there's no spoilers to give away. But what I thought was so interesting about that movie is that Michael Jordan himself wasn't even in the movie. The movie was a love letter to a corporate deal. We have entered the stage of cinematic storytelling where we are romanticizing companies. And then once I thought about that, I was like, there's that BlackBerry movie. There is the movie about Beanie Babies. There's the Michael Jordan movie. Like, we're at the part of cultural storytelling where the hero isn't Michael Jordan. The hero is the business deal that made everybody rich. So what does that say to you when, if I don't know if you ever did cinematic or film studies, but when I took film studies in university, I always learned that the cinemas reflect the values of the time, right? What does it say about us that like this is the thing that is reflected of this time? We are now idolizing and romanticizing a corporate contractual negotiation. I just thought that was so interesting.
I'll be the optimistic one this time. At the same time, it can be a good thing, because businesses will drive the future of our world. There's no doubt about that. The way we work is the way we are. And at the same time, we are now seeing a movement to small, incipient, humble, even contradictory, where the new business models of how to take care of the society, of the planet, of these principles that we want to bring forward, idolizing companies in that respect can also be very powerful, because in a sense, companies are these entities that they are connecting so many variables, narratives, incentives, policies, and it can bring us to what we're seeing now, and also it can bring us to what we can see in the future. So yeah, the analysis itself is so powerful, and I think thank you for bringing it here.
I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. I just thought it was so interesting because if you look at the movies that came up like 10 years ago, 15 years ago, we were idolizing people, right? It was the biography. It was like Abe Lincoln and like Churchill, and it was people. But now it's just so fascinating. Now we're in the era where we're romanticizing or we're mythologizing stories of companies. And I think that tracks because CEOs are our mythological figures. They're our heroes. They're the people that we look up to. They're the leaders of society. They're the ones that we are oriented to. Whereas before it might have been politicians and it might have been religious leaders in the past, but now we're really orienting towards CEOs, which brings us back full circle to the fact that then the people that we're idolizing, I hope they are taking the time to take care of their mental health, because I'm seeing a lot of CEOs that are just like completely unhinged these days. And that is, a need for, I don't know, a need to be recentered, a need for having enough, a need for just like being okay. Like, I just don't know if I agree anymore that the rules of the way we've been playing this game can still be played. There are optimistic things. I'm seeing books, a really interesting book recently called Green Swans about regenerative capitalism. That makes me very optimistic. What if we change the rules of capitalism so that it's not just about sustainability, it's about improving, leaving whatever you use better than when you found it. We're seeing things like, for more equality. So I'm hoping that these changes will happen, but I also know that a lot of these changes will only happen once old systems have been pushed to the brink. And that is sort of true historically, where that is the way our species learns. We have to hit a pain point that is so painful that we're forced to do things a bit differently. And we are literally witnessing we're pushing planetary systems, people systems, we're pushing everything to the brink. And do I think we can survive? Yeah, sure, I think we can survive, but do I think it's going to have a huge cost for a lot of people less fortunate than us? Yeah, I do too, and that really sucks.
Oof, yeah, and bringing us back full circle again it's the same that happened with you. Like you were pushed to the brink of a situation that it was no longer sustainable, that you went into another paradigm. And I think that one thing that we're missing in our world today is grieving process, collective and individual grieving process, because there's so much things to grieve all the time. And we we want to grieve quickly. We want to say, yeah, that happened, let's move on. And if we don't spend enough time hurting, the species lost, people lost, ideas lost, then at some point all those emotions are stored in our collective unconscious, in our institutions, in our narratives, in our languages, and we'll have to grapple with them sometimes. So we have to also be courageous, like we are being here right now, talking about our own grieving processes, our own trauma, our own shocks. And that in itself, it's healing, because it opens possibilities and it opens a new way of understanding who we are. So yes, and in a sense, when you talk about your topic of return on attention, for example, and you are putting attention on the way you are writing, your way you're being productive. What I'm seeing, at least for me, is that the whole concept of time is also being challenged. Like, how you said, how much money is enough money? When you go deep into this idea, is how much time is enough time? How long will Rahaf want to live? You want to live for 100 years? Probably you can live that 100 years in a single second of pure presence.
Yes.
I sometimes feel that when you are writing and just a paragraph gives you the experience that you are looking in the fame and the money that the money will bring to you. How has your time conception changed through all these ideas of healing, productivity, capitalism, conspiracy theories?
I think all of this is like what actually matters, right? And the biggest thing that happened in my own journey of having burnout, of grieving, was realizing that so much of it doesn't matter. What matters is being present. What matters is being with the people you love. What matters is finding joy. What matters, and so I have been experiencing a lot of like environmental anxiety over the last couple of years. And one of the things that I do is sometimes when I feel myself spiraling, I just put my hand on my heart and I say, yes, I know, but it's not happening this second. It's not happening today. We can just be present today. We can go on a walk today. We can be grateful for waking up today. And it's really this idea of being so hyper present, losing my mom so suddenly. I realized that there were all these assumptions I had made about how much time we had left and what we would have to do. And there are things where I just realized how fleeting it all is. And so I don't care anymore about external validation and about selling this many books or about anything like that. I care that I tell every person that I love them, that I never that I never miss an opportunity to give them a hug. My mom, the last time that I saw her was in August of 2020. And she was in my house in France, and we had to go. They were leaving the next day, so they were staying at our house. We had to go to Paris because we had to like move and do a bunch of stuff. And we were I went, bye, I'll see you soon. And then I got in the car, and as my husband was pulling out, I said, wait. And he stopped, and I got out of the car and I hugged my mom really, really tight. And I said, I'm going to see you in a few weeks, because I was going to go home in a few weeks. I said, I love you. I'm going to see you in a few weeks. And I hugged her so tight, and I got back in the car, and I didn't know that that would be the last time that I ever hugged her. And so, you never know. You never know when it's going to be the last time. You never know when it's going to be the last spring, the last morning, the last time you see your best friend, your husband, your wife, your kids. And so I really try to remember that mortality, because once you remember that mortality, it's like, does Instagram matter? No. Does the internet matter? No. Does making $1 billion matter? No, because none of those things are going to actually help. There is this really lovely poem that I think about all the time. It is called Loveliest of Trees. It's by a guy named A.E. Hausman, and it's like really short. My attitude. Okay. So it's like only a couple of lines. It's very short. So it says, loveliest of trees, the cherry now is hung with bloom along the bough and stands about the woodland ride, wearing white for Eastertide. Now, of my 70 years and 10, 20 will not come again. And if you take from 70 springs a score, it only leaves me 50 more. And since to look at things in bloom, 50 springs are little room, so about the woodlands I will go to see the cherry hung with snow. And every spring I think about this poem, because I think, how many springs will we see? How many springs do we have left? How many winters do we have left? And so it's really being super present, and that's when you feel the most alive, and then it's sort of with that knowing that everything is so fleeting, and there is an impermanence in everything anyway. So all you can do is just to be where you are. And that's kind of, it's just sort of grounded me in the things that matter. Like if I'm lucky enough to make it to be 80, am I going to say, oh, I wish I had more followers on Threads? Or am I going to say, oh, I'm so glad I spent every moment that I could with the people that I loved? And that's kind of what matters.
Thank you for the poem and for sharing the story with your mother. And I think that I admire you in a sense, because you carved out a career at the intersection of so many things that were separate. And you didn't specialize in a specific field. You just made whatever interests you into a career. And that's basically also what's at it's at the core of this, making the most of this thick present, which is, it's a cliche saying doing what you love, but probably that's also the future of our world. Not only because you are bringing vitality to the world, but because the world is so segregated into different areas of knowledge, areas of work, areas, specialization fields, where this vitality of I just want to do everything at the same time, and I want it now. That thing really brings this sense not only of personal fulfillment in the present moment, and saying goodbye to the things that we're going to say goodbye anyway, but also it will carve new worlds between the worlds we've already built. Mm-hmm. And I see there an explosion, or a potential explosion, of just human creativity, collective healing, smiling, hugging, that obviously will also be a part of our business life and our political life and everything. But that vitality, I think, right there and then, I don't know if a podcast like this was possible 5 years ago for you and I. We're still struggling with our own identities in that sense. And now we just say, yeah, we just do it. And then we say if that worked or that didn't work, but we don't look back in reproach, in anger, in just how do you say this? Just wishing things were different. For me, the pandemic was a big gift, because it gave me this permission of, probably you can jump into that water. So thank you, Rahaf, for being so open about this, and also for bringing together these topics of productivity and creativity into such a personal way, because at the end of the day, that's the whole thing. You're not teaching how to be more successful out there, but just be successful in your own eyes. And then that will translate into many beautiful things.
Well, that's so kind of you to say. I'm so glad. I hope it helps somebody listening to take some steps on their own path.
Yeah. And, last question probably is about, you've been, and you still are, giving conferences and talks and workshops all around the world. We met through one of the festivals in Mexico. And I've been thinking a lot about the future of these conferences. How will these conferences look in 20 years? And bringing all these principles that we've talked about in this conversation into a 3-day experience where you are addressing all this human drama, and not only the learning or the intellectual thing or the networking or the show or whatever. How do you see these events evolving to bring together all these ideas and needs and wants and just hopes?
What I would love to see is time scheduled in these types of events to think and just to process. I know that in the event that we met out in Mexico, it was amazing, but it was almost too much. It was almost like great idea. And I just felt my brain being like, too many great ideas. Like I just needed a minute to stop and think about all of this stuff that I had learned, and then to integrate it into my own sort of knowledge library, right? And so I would love to see, I know that the instinct that many people have is more, but actually I think putting aside some time for people to actually think, that would be incredible. And what I would love to see more is community. One of the things that was really destroyed during the pandemic is our tertiary networks, right? Our tertiary contacts and our secondary contacts. And so I would love to see more opportunities for us to spend time together. Like I was so happy to be able to spend time just having a coffee with you. I mean, I wish we had more time, but things like that, to have the time in the schedule that says, okay, we're going to sit outside, we're going to walk in the park and get a juice, we're going to, just have dinner, and to have these moments where people can be together. Because I think while digital is always such nice bridges to maintain, there is nothing that can compare with being with other people, especially when you hit it off and when you realize, oh, these are my people. These are people that I want in my community. And so I know that for myself, one of the things I'm taking into the fall and into the next year is a deliberate intention to rebuild community. I want to go on retreats and meet up with people and go to events. I want to rebuild that community because it was really eroded for me over the past 3 years. And I miss it. I miss being around people. So I think we should just remember that it's not just about the best ideas and it's not just about insights. It's really about meeting like-minded people, because that's the foundation of everything. And so I would love to see a more, I guess, human-centric approach instead of a content-centric approach to some of these events. I think that would actually elevate everyone's experience, because there's no shortage of good ideas, but there is a shortage of time. And I think if you're going to get people all in one place together, how lovely would it be to make some of those connections?
Yes. And, you know, at the same time, all the content is already online. So, you know, if we are going to spend a few days together, probably, you know, you can watch the content beforehand or afterhand. And we just, and the other thing, you know, I'm keeping back, I keep going back to this, but, you know, everything is so mental, intellectual, and just bringing back to the body, like integrating into this library of your own knowledge, but also library of your own being on how does it embody this new idea, this new challenge, this new possibility, and you know, working through dance, through art, through our hands, through putting our hands into our soil, hugging, I don't know, dancing. I think that the body can also be involved into these conferences in a more integrative way, and invent a new way of giving these conferences. Literally just taking your suit and your tie and just, I don't know, walk barefoot. I don't know. But yeah, the thing is that we as speakers and we as organizers should just do it, you know, without being concerned too much about the expectations. And once, you know, Eric, a friend of ours, says, like, you have to give people what they want so you can earn the right to give them what they need. And if we know that all these things are, you know, what basic human beings want, then those events and experiences are the best place to just go for it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think network design is so interesting too. It's like you go broad, you go deep, you go broad, you go deep. You meet 100 people, you pick 3 people and you develop a friendship with them. You know, so many times I've been in events where we've broken off into smaller groups and we were in beautiful locations and we heard amazing speakers, but then at night we like sat by the beach and we dipped our toes in the ocean and we talked about our favorite parts of the day. And it's oftentimes the community and the connection that helps synthesize your own thinking. You go, oh, I didn't think of that, or oh, that was a really good perspective. And I think that then just again elevates the value that everybody gets. Like there are certain connections that I've made that only could have happened because of these serendipitous encounters, and I wish we would design for them a little bit more, for sure.
Beautiful. Rahaf, thank you so much for a wide encompassing conversation. I feel your heart more than I read your mind, and that's beautiful, and I thank you for your openness.
Oh, thank you so much.
And hopefully this will be one of more of many conversations that we'll have.
Yes, I hope so.
Have a great day.
Thanks.